Hi. As you can imagine, there are many ways to study the relation between nutrition and health. What I'm going to try to do in this video is to give you an overview of the various types of study designs that are used in nutrition research. Now, roughly, we can make a distinction between experimental studies and observational studies. And let's start with the experimental studies, also called interventions or trials. In an experimental study, researchers do an actual experiment where they change a particular factor. Now, a good example would be a study where a group of subjects is provided with a certain type of diet and another group of subjects is provided with a different type of diet. It could be high versus low in fiber. It could be high versus low in sugar, high versus low in dairy products. There are countless possibilities. What I want you to realize is that experimental studies or interventions are the most powerful research design in nutritional science because they, and only they, can reveal a causal relation between a particular exposure and an outcome. And I will get back to that in one of the next video clips. By contrast, in observational studies, the researchers don't actually change anything. They just observe. They merely record the dietary habits of a large number of people and examine whether there is a relationship with health or disease. Do people that eat lots of olive oil have low rates of heart disease? Do people that regularly consume alcohol have higher levels of the good cholesterol? Do people that have a high intake of beta-carotene have a lower risk of developing certain cancers? All these questions are addressed via observational studies. The key feature is that people are studied in their natural context. Participants write down what they eat normally. They're not asked to change their dietary habits or take a pill or receive some other form of treatment. In contrast to experimental studies, observational studies do not provide any information on whether a relation between a dietary component and an outcome like blood pressure or body fat level, risk for certain diseases, is causal. And therefore, observational studies cannot lead to the conclusion that a high intake of dietary fiber protects against colon cancer. Rather, they can conclude that a high fiber intake is associated with reduced risk of colon cancer. And that's a very important distinction. What's so special about these observational studies is that they rely on the natural variation in the composition of the diet between subjects or between groups of subjects. And that means that if everybody eats more or less the same diet with little variation in intake of specific foods or nutrients, it's pretty much impossible to get meaningful data from observational studies. Now, there are different types of observational research designs that I will briefly introduce here. They are from more simple to more advanced and also more expensive: the ecological study, the cross-sectional study, the case control study, and the cohort study. Each of these studies have their specific advantages and disadvantages, which will be discussed in more detail in the next set of video clips. Now, a general aspect of observational studies that I would like to call your attention to is called dietary assessment. If, in an observational study, we want to make a link between dietary intake and risk of disease, we need to have solid info on the composition of the diet of the people in the study. What's their intake of protein per day, of saturated fat? What's their daily calcium intake? Normally, the participants reported information themselves. We call that self-reported dietary assessment. Now, there are different methods to collect information on people's diet. I'm not going to cover all of them here, but I'm going to mention one, which is the most common one. It's called a food frequency questionnaire. It's basically a long questionnaire that asks all kinds of questions about people's dietary intake. Now, because people in different countries have different diets, the food frequency questionnaire will also have to be different between countries. Obviously, you cannot use the same food frequency questionnaire in Japan as in Germany. I want to end this clip by raising a number of research questions, and as you go through the various research designs, I want you to determine what would be the most appropriate design to address that research question. Now, these research questions are, first one, how do we investigate the effects of almonds on blood cholesterol? Second one, how do we investigate the possible harmful effect of deep-fried foods on risk of throat cancer? And the last one, how do we investigate the possible favorable effect of vegetable consumption on risk of heart disease? Now, at the end of this section, I will get back to these research questions and discuss the possible answers.